Hello there. It's Hello there. I'm just going to treat what I've all just said on mute as a practice, and I'm going to get into it straight away now. Welcome to Autistic Radio, and welcome to Autistic Radio at this time of the year where we've got Autistic Radio Days. 4 days of podcasts and conversations from us at Autistic Radio. The authentic conversations that autistic people have. Welcome to day 1 of the programme here we have at Autistic Radio. Welcome to day 2. Welcome back to day 2 of Autistic Radio Days 2024. Hello and welcome again to Radio Days 2024. Day 3 of Radio Days. Hello there, you've found us again for the last day, day 4 of Radio Days 2024. I hope you've enjoyed what you've heard so far. Yes, indeed, it is day 3, and the podcasts I'm going to be playing with you for you today are all from Autistic Knowledge Development. I found out about Autistic Knowledge Development a couple of years ago, and I have to say they've really impressed me over the time. I'll tell you more about that later, but let's get straight in and play their first short introductions in our short introduction series, where Sean joined us and spoke about what he's doing there.
We speak our words, we listen.
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 Welcome to Short Introductions to an Autistic Radio production for autisticradio.com. It's part of our mission to find and talk to people who have a relationship with autism. That can be an autism professional, or it can be somebody with lived experience, an advocate, somebody who's working in the field with their own experience. Sean from Autistic Knowledge Development spans both sets of people. Let me introduce you to Sean. Hello, Sean.
Thank you, Jules. It's interesting hearing the range of people that you've had on your show. You've got lived experience and professionals, which is a neat segue into why Autistic Knowledge Development exists. Myself and my colleague Lila set up Autistic Knowledge Development back in March 2022 for a number of reasons. From being in the autism sector in Scotland, from having worked with some of the larger kind of service providers there seemed to be a stereotype that you were either a professional and you sat in a professional panel, or you were in the lived experience groups. As autistic professionals, can't we be both? I'm not kind of knocking either kind of professional insight or lived experience insight alone, but we believe there's an advantage from actually being a professional and also having a lived experience of being autistic. You might know how to navigate systems, that you might have more of a working knowledge of actually how to get change done. And one of the reasons that we exist is to try and kind of bust the myth. We'd like to get to a point where actually within groups of professionals, there are a lot of people with lived experience as well. Autistic Knowledge Development sits somewhere between an entirely autistic-led think tank and a safe test space for trying out new action research-led or autistic projects and ideas.
So from your point of view, Sean, the very fact that you are autistic and also an autism professional has a unique place in the future of the way things are done.
Yes, and it's around challenging stereotypes as well. All of the evidence from marginalized communities is that you need to be able to see what you can be, and you need to be able to have tangible examples of what autistic people can be. So we provide mentoring for autistic young people intensively over a 6-month period. And in some cases, we might be the first autistic person that wasn't in the frame of reference of being someone else that was receiving support from a healthcare service. And that it's to try and challenge the stereotype that we as autistic people will only ever be people that need support by someone that's outside of ourselves and outside of our own community. One of the things that we would like to challenge is the assumption of what autistic people can or can't be. Our young person's mentoring program is called Aim High. I completely respect the right of every autistic person to be average. I know I'm below average at certain things. I think if you were to swap the word autism with women, if we imagine the autism sector is women's rights sectors, if we swap the word autism for women, men delivering women's mentoring projects, telling women how to be better women, how to navigate the world as a woman, it descends into kind of farcical territory fairly quickly when you swap the word autism. And I think we're still living in a world where the best way I can describe it is there's a degree of cultural blindness, where in 2024, I don't think there's anyone would actually think that they could get away with having a male chief executive of a women's rights organization, but we still live in a paradigm where that's seen as being okay. So does that answer your question?
For autism. Do you know, I think it more than answers a question. Yeah, I agree with you. You make the point that you cannot be what you cannot see. One of the touchstones of marginalized groups. Representation as a positive example or role model is one of the big things you're doing, isn't it?
It is, yes. Whilst we're not saying we're all perfect and we've all completely got a handle on life, everyone that works with and for autistic knowledge development has reached a point where we not only accept that we're all autistic, but actually we feel positive about it. Now, I'm not being toxically positive, saying being autistic is just a complete walk in the park, because for me, it's not, it hasn't been. But I've reached a point with kind of my own understanding of what it is to be autistic for me, where if I was to be offered a cure, I would flat refuse it. And I've been able to look back and reflect on my own life and actually see that the successes that I've had have been entirely down to me having an autistic and ADHD mind. All the kind of post-diagnostic support projects that we're part of our autistic knowledge development, we take the approach of the rest of the world has probably told you all from a deficit-based point of view what society deems as being wrong with me, being wrong with us. It's not saying that being autistic is a completely positive experience, because sadly it's not. In the world that we live in, it's not necessarily designed for autistic people. But if you've gone through a formal diagnosis, you'll have basically had a very deficit-based approach and report. And what we try to do is to try and get autistic people to explore what are some of the more positive parts of what it is to be autistic.
I think what your aims are, Sean, are very similar to what we do with Autistic Radio. We're a group of self-starting autistic people. Nobody's sort of set this up for us. There's nothing tokenistic about what we do. It's not led by people who aren't autistic, and we're just there to do the box ticking. Yeah, so I see parity and similarity really between what we do and what you do, which is lovely. That's really nice.
Thank you, Liz. I mean, the phrase that I use commonly is be the change that you want to see. We've got a joint collaboration project with National Autistic Society Scotland. As a community, we work together, trying to also have a pragmatic approach of what's the best way to help as many autistic people as possible. Now, we're a tiny little organisation, but we have big plans and big dreams.
I am hearing the passion in what you're saying here, Sean. It's coming through loud and clear. Somebody who knows what it's like to be autistic and is wanting to be a pioneer out there, an example, and a cooperative autism professional with the existing autism world. Have I read that right?
Yes, you have. We're in this because it sounds naive, but we genuinely want to change the world for the better, make a positive difference. And one of the things that we're very keen on is to normalize the experience of being autistic. We're a demographic of the population. And there's the saying that goes, if you met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. I believe that we are far more embedded in the general population than people realise. So the Scottish Government uses the figure of 1 in 100 people they think might be autistic. Anecdotally, I have not got any autistic friends that aren't autistic and something else as well. So I'm autistic and ADHD and I'm dyslexic as well. They've just done a really interesting study to see junior school age young people were only autistic or if they might be autistic and ADHD, dyslexic, etc. And 80% of the people that in the research turned out to be more than just autistic. And I think if anyone gets a diagnosis for dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD, autism, it would be great if people were screened for more than one neurodivergence. With a figure of 1 in 10 and 1 in 20, it's not based on scientific research, but if you look at the blurred lines between what it is to be ADHD and what it is to be autistic, I think in 20, 30 years' time, there might be a new word which no one's even said or invented yet that actually starts to capture more of what it is to be part of this section of the human race.
It's interesting. I always use this 1 in 6 people as any form of neurodivergence. Well, innate neurodivergence. The 80% statistic, that's quite high. That doesn't surprise me at all. What does surprise me is when people think they only have one aspect of neurodivergence or one neurotype. I think most of us are multiply neurodivergent, and that's a journey that I don't think people embark on from the medical model. People aren't offered screening for different types of neurodivergence alongside the one that they end up on the pathway for. I think for a lot of neurodivergent people I know, we have made those realizations from contacts with our peers, with the community. That has been incredibly valuable. Every other neurodivergent person I've had this conversation with is understanding, learning from our peers and understanding what it is that makes up our individual neurotype has been much more helpful and much more empowering than any session with a clinician or a diagnostician or a psychologist or whatever. We actually seem to learn more of value from our own community.
I think this was the last 10 days or so. There was a piece of research by Nottingham University. Clinicians are now admitting that having some form of service, and I use service in the health and social care partnership definition of the word service, that has people who have walked the same path and have reached a positive endpoint from, say, for example, if you're starting to think that you might be autistic, if you recently got a diagnosis, that they're actually saying that there is some things here that's beyond kind of traditional therapy that has a measurable positive benefit on people, which is just from actually being able to speak to someone that's been there.
I have a little bit of a spanner to throw in the works because I think Both of you have mentioned what I find is a bit of an orthodoxy out there in autistic circles, that it's rare for somebody to just simply be autistic. And my experience amongst my autistic friends and my autistic family and my autistic self is that we do not add on a number of other labels to go with it. The autism label for us is broad enough to include a few things as autism. So I'm a little bit more cautious than the two of you to speak of our general population as one that is multiply challenged by different diagnoses.
Multiply challenged is an interesting way of putting it. This is a language point that when people start to use different definitions of commonly accepted words, the conversations become very difficult to have and they become very difficult for people to access. So if you consider traits of dyspraxia to be traits of autism, it makes it very difficult for people who may be dyspraxic but don't know it yet to understand that that is something that is going on with their neurotype. If they're unable to access or be exposed to the correct label, the correct term, it's very difficult to then know where to go and get support. So if you have challenges with dyspraxia, but everyone around you is calling it autism, you're never going to find the information about dyspraxia on the internet. So I think it helps to have very clear labels for different types of neurodivergence and different things that affect people, because otherwise it makes it inaccessible for people to find information and support to help them.
When I facilitate groups of autistic people, one of the things that I'm very mindful of is how different we can be as a community. So I'm not meaning to disadvantage anyone, but I have a natural tendency to speak fast. I'm probably speaking faster than normal because it's been slightly anxiety provoking. This is a new thing that I've never done before. I'm, as a kind of person, I find it easier reading conversations if I can see someone's face. And also when I'm passionate and or got higher levels of anxiety, I tend to speak a lot more quickly. And this is one of the bits where I've found kind of, if you want to call it labels or identity. So understanding that I'm autistic and ADHD has been really helpful for when I was wanting to normalize what my own experience of being a human being is, actually sometimes to be in the room with other autistic ADHD people and you can see more similar communication styles. But equally, I think one of the things that I'm quite passionate about is to try and get a degree of acceptance and tolerance and understanding within the autistic community in the fact that to make somewhere a place that is welcoming, open, allows everyone to participate with parity, then it requires all of us to go slightly out of our comfort zones, being mindful that what actually could be a reasonable adjustment and be a positive accommodation for me might actually put someone on the back foot and vice versa. There's a whole conversation here, though, again, that teeters into, is this me actually masking? And if someone who's put themselves forward to set up an autistic-led organization, the decision I've made for myself when I'm in spaces like this, when I'm facilitating, if I'm leading any training, if I'm doing mentoring, is that my reasonable adjustments should be secondary to what's going to be beneficial for the whole group. It's one of the things I'm quite passionate about, and I might get shot down for this, but anyone that puts themselves up as an autistic advocate that wants to kind of be in a space where they're helping other autistic people, I am very aware that I can speak at 100 miles an hour. This balancing act, being true to my autistic self, and see what's going to help as wide a section of the autistic community as possible.
Wow. This is very much like I remember it, speaking with Sean and Liz and Nyla, the passion coming across is what you've written there in the text, Raymond, isn't it? And the channeling of his passion. He's holding it all together and structuring it. Raymond, you've described it as marshalling his thoughts, and we tried to move away from military terms, and I suggested maybe gathering, but you pointed out that it's another process. Marshalling is ordering them and making them accessible and working. And I think of marshalling trains, train yards, where everything has to be got into the right place and order, and then it's something that people can see and visualise as compartmentalised. And yeah, he does speak at 1,000,000 miles an hour. I do remember editing this and trying in every way I could to slow the whole thing down. And I also remember trying to slow myself down to try and influence and bring it, because when I listen to this, I need a break. I need to stop. I need to stop it on the Podbeam app or whatever, wherever I'm listening to it, and I need to think about it. It's so dense. It's so passionate. But yeah, I agree with you, Raymond. A nice balance overall.
Since we're considering order, point of order, just a slight echo on your voice, but that's okay. Yeah, he did mention ADHD as well, which may be part of that speed, that velocity, that need almost to maintain expression. Slowing people down can work, but is often antagonistic as well. Well, not antagonistic, but difficult to relate to. I was thinking there at the very end when he was talking about, it was almost like, you know how we get locked into the binary options, the choices. It's like either I do it this way or I do it that way. And he was relating it to wider access, you know, the ability to communicate in common to people at large, rather than just a specific kind of listenership or group. And obviously I've heard them since, and he may have worked on his delivery, he may not have, but he sounds great. You know, I thrive at that speed too, thinking at that speed sometimes, but also I relate to and can slow down. And I think it's necessary to slow down and to inhabit the space between the binary options that we're locked into. I'm either this way or that way. It's like, just let both go for a while and be in the relation, the communication. Because that passion is deep, it's in the body. It's a real need to express, to be, or even to not be anything at all, to become. And that's very, very difficult space, because we have been ordered through language, learning, discipline, all our lives, that there are ways, into ways. I'll leave it at that, because I'm beginning to spiral off and under the influence of coffee.
I love what you're saying there, Raymond. It's like people have tried to force a certain type of communication on us. It's not just the masked communication, it's the it's just, it feels, if you're autistic, that you are being forced and moulded by everything around you, everything that's set up around you, to try and communicate in a different way to what is natural to you. So when he mentioned masking earlier, he was saying that he was actually willing to bend himself to mask to make it possible for him to be in the right spaces, to bend to those places. And he actually suggested that he might be shot down by some advocates because it was not their idea of being authentic. And he continually talks about being in two worlds. I think him navigating that is important, and I think anybody who criticises him navigating that really needs to think about it stronger, how much they benefit from him navigating that, and how much they could benefit from him navigating that, even if it's not their thing, their skill. You know, horses for courses. He always impresses me. I'll let him speak on.
I'd like to join you in that conversation, because I think sometimes there's too broad a definition of the word masking. For me, I see masking as something that is a process that is grinding away at someone because they are so habitually behaving in normative ways that are not naturally themselves, that it's hurtful to them and it's a process. But not every adaptation to a circumstance, as you've described it, is masking. If you decide to come here and speak a little slower or leave some gaps between sentences, some people would say that's masking, but I would say to you that that is actually using a skill to communicate.
Jules, I would completely agree with you. And it's one of these things that I've worked as an educator, worked at colleges, universities at postgraduate level. And one of my duties as an educator is to try and bring the whole room with you. And I think that's equally true of anyone that steps into what I call the Spartacus space within autism sector, which is actually saying, right, okay, let's set a thing up. It could be the radio station that you've set up. It could be autistic knowledge development, autistic-led organizations or events or meetups. But there's a duty of care to bring people along with you and also to be accessible. Over 2023, as an organization, we started kind of having more meetings and working with colleagues from the learning disability community. And one of the things that we found was really useful was looking at the reasonable adjustments that we have in place for those meetings. We've actually taken on board for everything that we do. If you design something to be better and more inclusive for a particular community, that it's our belief that the benefits for this are for all of society. A lot of the kind of good practice that's happening in the autism world, in the autism sector, it's actually seen as something that should be picked up far and beyond.
Tell me about the main project that you're involved with at the moment, Sean. What's the thing that's really working at the moment for you?
So we've got a project that's live. It's called Embrace Autism. It's done in joint partnership with National Autistic Society Scotland and also another autistic-led organisation called Autistic Flair. It's got two parts. One is a digital part where we've got a series of 6 short videos that are what I would describe as the back of the book version of what myself and many other autistic people wish they'd known or they'd been signposted or told about when we first realised or that we might be autistic, or we started to self-identify as autistic, or we'd actually got formal diagnosis of being autistic. 6 very clear themes. The first one is about autism The next one is identity and intersectionality. The one after that is masking and energy. The one after that is relationships. The one after that is reasonable adjustments, legal protections and benefits. And then the last one is employment, but it's not looking at employment in a very linear, conventional sense. It's actually looking at having a sense of purpose. They've had a pretty good reception so far. We know a lot of the information will be old news to people that have kind of explored and researched what it is to be autistic to them. But equally, it takes away the lottery of, I know when I Googled autism when I first got my diagnosis, it was like I was given a terminal cancer diagnosis from what I saw on the internet, all written by well-intentioned people, but it was very difficult to find anything that had been written by a person who was actually autistic. And we wanted to change that first experience. There'll be quite a lot of autistic people might never think to go to a group or a peer support group or one-to-one. And hopefully this would provide them with a kind of useful step and a bit of a steer of maybe where to go and look next.
It's lovely listening to this, because we recorded it in February of the year, nearly a year ago, and everything you can hear him passionately saying now happened. Everything. It's moved on. We're right here at the beginning of this, and in those months, with the funding, he managed to, with his colleagues, with Lila, put together a program where an autistic organisation themselves were providing a service that then is seen as a model and a beacon and a way forward to copy. When there were 16 different recipients of the same funding, this is the one that is being picked out as the premier one. And I just think it does come from the passion that he explained earlier, that he wants to make a difference. Their heart is in this. They don't leave autism at the office. They take it home with them, they wake up with it, and every relationship they have with everybody around them is coloured by their autism.
Yeah, it's kind of like autistic joy when you discover what you're truly about. And therefore, you can't deny it. You just have to go with it. You have to follow it where it leads. I love how he used the phrase non-linear on occasion there. But it's also a logical process what he's following through. I imagine it's expanded into having a few other people involved too. A kind of structure of an organisation. Because my experience from observing people related to autism online since my diagnosis is that there are periods where they're really hyperactive, and then there's kind of not a burnout but a tiredness can set in, because sometimes you want to be independent, you don't want to share too much responsibility given the passion that you're enjoying in a sense. But ultimately, if you can't share the load, it will weaken you slightly and you'll get exhausted. So learning to delegate is another matter altogether. It's just a thought that went through my head relating to all this.
This is very interesting to me, and I'll share some of my experience. I had my autistic realization, it was framed as part of the neurodiversity paradigm to me by somebody. Something that I don't understand fully now, but I understand enough of it basically. And having that realization was the point. It was not the diagnosis that came later. I thought would be a gateway for me to a local service. And since my diagnosis, I have no contact with any professional or any service. What I have had is a peer support group organised by an individual who is now a member of our team. That was where I got my experience right at the beginning, talking with Morris to explore autism and get support from my peers. That's what you want to expand out, isn't it?
It is, yes. And we also have running in parallel with the videos, because we're hoping that will help people in parts of Scotland that there might be nothing at the moment, or people who might be on waiting lists or waiting to get on a waiting list, which I've been one of those people before, been on the waiting list for a waiting list. But we've also got people to be in a room with 10 or 12 other autistic people with an autistic facilitator to explore some of the subjects, to share their own experience, to learn from each other. And one of the main things which we've seen is just normalizing the experience of what it is to be autistic. And we're going to have an independently published bit of research and report from the project. And that's going to be looking at a number of things. One, how successful the projects seem to be by the people who've been through it. And we have, in all the work that we do, we have action research embedded, and we have kind of 4 or 5 very basic questions that are a way of kind of judging how people felt about being autistic and their own lives before they started and afterwards, because we're very aware that there's not much evidence base for a lot of stuff that happens in autism world.
Sean, I'm impressed by you. You do speak at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and sometimes that's not as accessible to me as an old fella as it could be. But I will be able to stop the recording and listen again and absorb, and I will get everything from what you've been saying. And that's a wonderful thing about it being a podcast and a way of long form communication that is under the control of the listener. I'm impressed by you to the extent that I want to be involved with you. The passion that comes across, the fact that you've already achieved a framework. An awful lot of projects out there have not got anywhere close to the distance that you've already travelled. That's impressive. How can we at Autistic Radio magnify or be part of your journey? What can we do to help?
Well, Jules, first of all, that's super cool. A really kind of wonderful thing to hear. Thank you. We're not doing what we're doing for praise, although it does help when you're having tough days to know that actually some people can see and understand why you're doing what you're doing. We know that as a community, we are stronger when we have common goals. One of the main difficulties that I've seen is the amount of infighting that goes on, the unhelpful politics. How you can help us is by being an ally, being an advocate, and we actively look at ways of working on tangible projects together. So say, for example, one of the things that you could help with now is if you have a look at the videos, if you think you're great, by all means share them. Equally, if you think there's things that can be improved on, then we're not here to say we've got everything right. We've made our best attempt at this here now, but everything that we do is a work in progress, and everything that we do is led by and for the autistic community. So I think the best thing to do is to keep on having conversations. And one of the things that I love about meetings like today is it's great to meet other people who have a similar passion and who are in this for the right reasons, not in it to kind of build a name or build an ego, being involved to try and make things better for all of the autistic community. And I think the more conversations we can have like this, where it's allowing people opportunity to have different opinions, I think it's absolutely brilliant. And also to then get the understanding with the autistic community that just because you have different opinions doesn't mean that you can't work with someone, doesn't mean that you can't respect them as a human being. And to try and get away from some of the kind of stuff that you see that happens online, like where it might be someone that's very well-meaning, well-intent, has well and good intent, might end up kind of falling foul just because they might have said something someone disagrees with on masking, or they might have decided to say that they're a person with autism rather than an autistic person, which is entirely that person's choice. And I think more of this kind of, I hate to use the word sensible, but sensible conversations like we're having today, where we can respect each other, we can have different opinions, we're not going to fall out with each other for having different opinions. To me, that makes a lot healthier space for people to come in and start to explore what it is to be autistic.
So that's a wonderful place. And that's a wonderful sentiment to finish our conversation today. Because we have time in other conversations, we're going to come back, we're going to speak with Sean and with his colleagues at Autistic Knowledge Development. We're not going to only follow their progress, we're going to do whatever we can to enable their progress. Thank you, Sean, for coming today. Thank you for speaking with us.
Thank you so much for having me, and looking forward to seeing what happens in the next few months. Thank you.
That's the beauty of the short introductions to podcasts that we make. An introduction to somebody with something to say about autism. And that includes you. It's very easy to make a recording with us. We might publish 10 minutes or we might publish 30 minutes. It's about your relationship to autism, whether you're a professional, a carer, or somebody with autism. An autistic person of autistic identity. Contact me, Jules, news@autisticradio.com. And let's make a recording together so that you can join and expand upon the conversation around autism. I really enjoyed revisiting that, especially knowing what happened and what developed.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. You actually were part of the development. You were part of the what did they call it? Understanding Our Autism, was it?
Sorry, I was on the number 6 base one where I bumped into yourself there.
Ah, right. Did you go on the Autistic Knowledge Development one afterwards?
No, I think something like that may be coming up for me. I've got something in January, but because I applied for a number of different groups, I'm unsure at this moment which one. One of them cancelled in December, so I'm hoping it's them because I'd like to link up.
Yeah, I think if it would be great if you are the punter on the scheme, because you're going to get an inside view of it as well. I went on a different one, and I praised it in a recording because the person who presented it was autistic. So even though the materials that they were presented with, I would say were kind of old-fashioned and often inappropriate for our age group particularly, because there was an autistic person who was very well informed on much more modern versions of autistic identity, and also they were educated at a high level as well. I think they were university educated at all. I don't think it was a PhD. It may have been a master's in something. So my feeling was that I could praise that on the radio programme. I could say that that had managed to do something. I still didn't think it had got anywhere near what I've seen the Autistic Knowledge Development course being. That just seemed much more wraparound. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm confused here, Jules. You were on the same one as me, yeah? You weren't
Yeah.
on Sean's one.
I wasn't on Sean's one, no. but
You
I
would have liked to have been on Sean's
I
one,
would have
which
liked to
I
have been on
empathise
Sean's one.
with. Yeah.
Yeah. But what I'm trying to say is, I did come across, on the one that I was on, I did come across with a positive thing to say on a podcast about it. You know, it was adequate because there was an autistic person doing it. The organisation behind it, you've just mentioned them, I was not impressed with. I was not impressed with the materials the person was given, or the way it was put out to autistic people. It was too difficult to join it. You had to register for it. It was just not appropriately done by the people who were the professionals behind it. But it was saved by the autistic person for me. And yeah, we did meet there. I have more experience of autistic knowledge development than I should have, having not gone on the course, because I've spoken to Sean and Lila a lot since, and I've seen their materials, and I've been along to their meetings. So I'm not going to go on that course myself, so it's going to be interesting when you go on it to compare the two.
Yeah, I was wondering, or maybe we're live just now, eh? There's maybe things I should stick to keeping in PM. Yeah, I think it was quite open-minded and open-ended, the one we were on, and that was what was good about it, because we all come from different angles and we're all approaching with different needs and expectations even. So, and sometimes, you know, it's not fully utilised. In the same way I had concerns about anybody facing a diagnosis, you know, without an advocate there to represent you and support you, you could blow it. You could blow the opportunity to a certain extent through the pressure of it all, or the lack of engagement. So follow-up might not have been maybe what you or I were desiring in that context, but the open-endedness of it was quite, you know, embracing. It was quite comfortable, and I felt good about that. We're obviously looking for things. We all do this. We respond to rhythms, patterns that, you know, work with us and maybe sometimes challenge us. So I think that's why we're looking at AKD and autistic knowledge development and the people involved as being something responsive, you know, like harmonizing to a certain extent.
Bluntly, I would just say better. I would say better, cheaper, safer, and with much more long-term benefits. I can't find anything to criticise what they've done for at the moment. You know, you can add embellishments to things, but the basic chunk of what they did is so much better value for money for the taxpayer than any of the other schemes. The other schemes spent most of their money on extraneous costs, their own incomes and their own wages in some circumstances. Whereas the Autistic Knowledge Development crew have got all the facts, all the figures, all of the research that was then put to the minister at Holyrood. It just knocks everybody else out of the park. It's a quantum leap. It's a change forward in provision of services for autistic people, cheaper and better.
Yeah, consumer power.
Well, that's us for today on autistic knowledge development, short introductions. I'm hoping that after the next show, coming up at 3 o'clock, we might be able to go back to one of their later broadcasts and flesh out what we've been talking about, myself and Raymond here. It's a big subject up here, because it's about how things are done for our community, the recently late diagnosed, adult diagnosed, and how we can get real appropriate services rather than what we've been offered before. We're joining Lucy now. Lucy has got this wonderful new program with us, looking at her own blog that she has out there as a Substack. I enjoy every time when I see it in my inbox that I get a notification that Lucy has put something out there. I might just see and smile at the title first, and then it'll be something I can, if I need to go and later on think and be stimulated about autism in a practical way and think about what it's like to have a life out there with autism that isn't exactly me but is similar to me. I've got that as a little present for myself that I can go and listen to her Substack or read it through, depending on how I feel at the time. In day 1 and day 2, we had quite different versions and quite different conversations. What are you bringing us today, Lucy? It's 3 o'clock and showtime.
Oh yes, and I'm totally ready. Thanks for that wonderful build-up. It's really, really nice to hear. This we've kind of got a bit of a masking one today, or a sort of a change of identity one, which I wrote back in September, which is just touches on some things that were happening at the time. As I read it, it will become clear what it's all about. So, are you ready for me to start?
You do this to us every time. You tempt us, and then you keep us on bated breath, and then you say, "Oh, would you like us to start?"
I'm just being polite, Jules, that's all. Right, okay. And by the way, the titles are always the last thing that arrive on these Substacks. So I always write the article and then think of the title last. So they're always appropriate. And this one is called Another Girl, Another Planet, or I've Never Been to Me. Cables get tangled awfully easy, don't you think? Doesn't really matter how carefully you put them away. 5 minutes later, they'll be scrambled and twisted into an obscene rat king, a knotted, tangled spaghetti of various long-forgotten connecting wires that once gave electrical life to now long-deceased or injured gadgets. In our house, we have what we call the bits and pieces drawer into which we have carelessly jammed all the spare charging leads and headphones for these redundant devices we've used and abused over the course of many years. The vain hope is that one day we'll have a use for them and pull them back out of retirement and back into useful service. The drawer is a doll's house version of those Hoarders TV shows, compacted into the size of a wooden shoebox. I really don't like having to open it if I don't have to, because it's a bugger to squeeze shut again. It's a graveyard for antique technology that was once vital to us once upon a time, but is now laughed at. Do you remember when this was state of the art and forgotten, obsolete and of no use? I had reason to delve into this usual no-go area this week. My hair, normally a uniform grade 3 on the clippers, self-administered, as yet another shortcut to avoid the social horrors of a visit to the barber's. It looked way too curly. Sadly, somewhere in the last month, I'd stashed away the black case that holds my kit, and in doing so, had managed to lose the essential charging cable. It wasn't in the cupboard where it usually lives. I drew a blank in the less congested places, like under the sink in the bathroom, the bottom cupboard in the kitchen, but no luck. And so, with somewhat of a heavy heart, I approached that dreaded gadget graveyard, opened it, and pushed my hands in amongst the chaos. As expected, it was solid, layer upon layer of congealed wire and metal. The further down I delved, the more ancient the technology, like sedimentary rock settling into strata over time. Whilst my deep dive returned nothing useful, I found something near the bottom of the drawer that didn't belong in there. It was a piece of card, I thought, pasted flat at the bottom. I peeled it off and pulled it free of the mare's nest and discovered an unblemished photo mounted on gold paper. When I looked at it, I recognised the fresh-faced kid, also unblemished, at least on the exterior.
Sorry, Lucy, I don't want to lose this. You're going to have to go back because the sound broke up.
All right.
Okay, it was a sentence before this.
Okay, so where am I? Okay, so I should I go from the whilst my deep dive and just do that whole little paragraph?
Yes, do that.
Okay. Whilst my deep dive returned nothing useful, I found something near the bottom of the drawer that didn't belong in there. It was a piece of card, I thought, pasted flat at the bottom. I peeled it off and pulled it free of the mare's nest and discovered an unblemished photo mounted on gold paper. When I looked at it, I recognised the fresh-faced kid, also unblemished, at least on the exterior. A fully made-up young woman wearing a satin suit, jacket and a gold necklace, and it was me. The lipstick was perfect, the hair was coiffed, and it was obviously taken in a photo booth. For some reason, I could not tell you, as in, I don't know. Now.
Wow. Right, okay, so now so what you've done is you've gone to the place, you're all clippered up, you know, you've got this version of yourself and you're delving to find us, and there you've got your old version of a different version of yourself, and it's staring at you in a picture. Bloody hell, man. It's so it's so joined, isn't it?
It was a shock because it was in the place I was not expecting it to be sat there. I mean, how long had it been sat there? Why did I put it in there? Why was it at the bottom? And the more I looked at it, the more I thought, I don't really remember this. And it was like there was a kind of a bit of a gap in my kind of global thinking. It was like there is a period of time that I've either shut out, shut off, tried to ignore, or that it's just no longer relevant to me. But there she was. And so, you know, I was faced with a version of myself that not even I could really remember.
What's the age jump in this?
So, from memory, and I really couldn't pin it down, I was probably in my mid-20s, not quite 30 yet. So I was probably somewhere around my mid-30s. I'm 51 now, so it's like, what, where am I? So that's like 30 years on or something like that. It feels it's a long time in the past, but my ability to be able to pin this down is actually quite frightening, because it sort of, I try to work it out in my fingers and try to work it, because I've moved so many times in my life. I've moved about 19 times during my lifetime to different places. So it's like just trying to pin that one year maybe, or whatever it was, down. And so it's probably about 25, 30 years ago.
Wow, that's a real time machine, isn't it? But for you, it's also an identity thing. I'm guessing that you're looking at that image of yourself and you're thinking, well, you're thinking a lot of things. You know, what are you thinking about? You're look in the mirror now and look at that picture.
Well, because I've got my Substack open in front of me, she's staring at me right now. So I'm looking down into my lap at this precise second at a picture of me where that's obviously me. I can see it's me, but I can't remember. I was wondering whether I was dressed like this to please like somebody, or to fit in with somebody. And I mean, it does go on to explain this in a short while further on in the article, but looking at her now, yeah, I mean, I seem to have put a lot of effort into this look. This is quite stunning that I've managed to pull this off, because this is something that I just would not have the energy for anymore. I don't have the energy for this anymore, for makeup and eyeliner and lipstick and gold necklaces and crap like that. You know, I see that as these trinkets are something I just don't need. So whoever she was putting in so much effort just to be that way.
I've looked at my email, and the last link I have is to your Substack about boots. And Ray wants to have a look at the link now while we're talking with you about it.
Yeah, okay. I could probably find that. Hang on.
Just pop that in the chat.
I do have to go into my computer to be able to get that link, because I've got my...
It doesn't matter. Carry on. Keep the flow.
Yeah, if you're sure.
Oh, absolutely. No, I can look it up myself. I just put that in there.
Oh yeah.
I just love I love the phrase mare's nest, but I'll leave you to it.
I'll explain it later. Yeah, so like looking at her, I can see that she was a trier. This one, she was a trier, and she was obviously, you know, fitting in. And I kind of go third person when I think about this, because of the fact that there's been me, and then there's been sort of other versions of me, and some of them have got lost along the way. Surely, you know, it's just a strange thing.
I think it was the writer Joan Didion who talked about the former lives of people she used to be that she's lost contact with.
Yeah, which is the perfect way to describe it, because that is, you know, it's only relevant for the time. You know, as far as I'm concerned, I left her, this Lucy, in a space and time. I've done this a lot. Reinvention for me is a really strange thing. And as an aside, when I got into my 30s, I became very, very overweight. Okay. So that was a different version of myself, where I put on a ton of weight, really, really to the point where it was getting silly. And I ended up having gastric bypass surgery. And they performed this on me. And I went from being about 18 stone over the course of not quite a year to just about 7.5 stone. So I had an entire year where I went from being one person and living life as a person who had quite a lot of weight on me to losing all the weight on my body and becoming a really skinny version of myself. And that was another reinvention. I seem to do this a lot.
Yeah, that's a big deal. I'm thinking back to the blog and the photograph, and if you look at that young woman, as you say, that third person, and you said she's done it well, or she's done a good, she's managed to fit in well. Do you look at her and say that person there is of the time, just before the millennium, and so she's of the clothes of the time, of the makeup of the time, and she is perhaps going to an event that she's fitting in at, like a club or a wedding? Is that what you were trying to get across as well?
I would say that it wasn't of the time. It was just of the situation. I mean, I'm dressed here to please a partner that I had at the time. Just somebody I was with for a very short space of time. But yeah, I was doing this to please. It was when I say she's got the energy to do this, this girl, this woman had the energy to do this. It's like, I was just trying to be the person that people wanted me to be. It had nothing to do with the fashion. It had a lot to do with, and I'll also explain this later on in the article, with the person that I was with, who, donated the clothes there. But this was done in a photo booth, so I can't imagine that I was off somewhere or doing something. I just, this has totally no context for me.
Somebody had dressed you.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. And I think that's the thing. It's being. I didn't know I was autistic, but being an autistic person and being in a relationship at that point, obviously, this is how I coped with that relationship, by allowing that person to influence me to the point where I would not be dressing for me at all. A lot of the time it was because it was to please someone else. I gave up makeup about 10 years ago completely. And I totally just gave up trying it because I felt that there was no real occasion for me to wear it. And I'm not really doing it for anybody else, because it was always just for everybody else to see. It wasn't for my own gratification. So she was this person, this girl, this Lucy, is really being affected by what's around her and her situation and what she can do to be sort of bedded in there. I was living with this person, so I guess I was just trying to be the person that they wanted me to be. So I was being dressed up.
I get the sense of you as an older woman now, or somebody who's had more experience of life because a couple of decades have passed. You're looking back on and you're kind of getting an insight into them, and that they possibly didn't have, and getting a perspective that they didn't have, that young person that is in the third person in the picture.
Yeah. Obviously with loads of hindsight, you can break it all down into pieces and go, at this point I was doing this, and at this point I was doing that, and so it's like gosh, I've lost my train of thought. But it's really, now I can look back on that and go, well, I think she was great for doing it, and I don't think it's a terrible thing, because I think she put in the effort and she was really going for it, and bless her heart, she did it. And so in a way she's probably got a lot more energy than I have for these things, but that sense waned,
So you're also proud of her for achieving something against the odds.
Oh Oh, totally. Yeah, absolutely. I've got no problem with any past me's because, it's all led to this point. And life is yeah. Thank you, Raven. Compassion for yourself, really. It is forgiving yourself for maybe getting into the wrong situation now and then, and saying, this really wasn't your fault, or and just being okay with every step along the way, and say that's just the path. Everything is just a path, and and you just follow it along, and it takes you wherever. I was watching a film the other day. What was it called? Everything Everywhere All at Once or something. It's a Korean film, and it was showing like multiple universes and how you could slip into, your life could have slipped left or right or forward, or and that's how I look at life. It's like this it's all accidental, and you end up where you end up sort of by accident and not by design.
I'm taking the cue from Raymond there where he says compassion for oneself. I love the idea that you look back on these former selves, and unlike so many people and so many of the narratives that go along with films and books and in the popular, in culture, in literature, that people go back with regret, and if only I could, that former self didn't, the regret of the former self. And that bit that you express about the forgiveness of them and the kindliness and understanding of those former selves, those former incarnations that are, as you say, under such outside pressures, what could have happened to them, the almost survivors of the situation. I think that's a really lovely, positive thing that autistic people particularly need to find if they can.
There is no point beating yourself up for anything you've done. You've done it, so you've got to own it. And it is, whether it's a good experience that you smile about, or a bad experience that you cry about, or one that just makes you cringe, and I've had a lot of those over the years. These are all things I've done, and it's okay. It's okay to feel a little bit embarrassed and whatever about yourself sometimes, but all the way through you have to be forgiving and allow yourself that space. I mean, there's plenty of people who are going to beat you up in this world and say horrible things about you, and you shouldn't be one of them. You should not be in this sort of party of people that are against you. You should be, you should just take care of yourself and give yourself time and space and accept. Can I just say that Raymond's just said in the chat there that they used to say that photos captured the soul. And as a young child, I couldn't have my photo taken. When I was really, all the photos that I have of myself as a child from between the ages of about like 4 and maybe up to about 8, I'm probably crying, about to cry, or have cried. Because I used to feel like the camera was something that was stealing something from me. I felt horrible standing in front of something that was capturing my image and taking a piece of me and putting it down on a piece of paper. So, hey, is that maybe they do? As a child, I felt that some sense that I was having something taken from me whenever anybody put me in front of a camera.
This is something quite important for me just now, because it's sort of erupting in my feelings and thoughts. Is when you do this thing of going back over things in your life, that stage at very early childhood, that exposure to recognition and representation I felt very strongly when I first arrived at school, and I've spoken about this before. So there's something in that for me, and I think it may be a common thing among some others, at the root of some of the ways we relate.
I think you're on common ground, definitely there, Raymond. I can't explain it just in words. I'd have to say it in a kind of story about, as a young boy, I was moved from school to school regularly. So I constantly had this new experience of being introduced as the new boy to the class or to the school or to the football, to everything, and then it all went round again another period of time later, less than a year later usually. And lots of other experiences during school time of being exposed, entering a room or standing up in assembly, all of these things. Real difficulty for autistic people in those exposures. A photograph is like having a lot of eyes looking at you. And I think a lot of us feel that if we enter a space, we feel as though the whole population feels much more aware and thinking that everyone else is looking at them more than they are. That's a known psychiatry thing. But then for autistic people, I think with our sensibilities and our sensitivities to the environment and I think it becomes so overwhelming that our experience of children is a kind of repetition of a difficulty. I'm not going to say trauma, I'm just going to say difficulty that then moulds us. Does that come anywhere near how you feel about it?
Yeah, exactly. And I was just going to put into the text there, a photo is an exposure. And I was going to ask, like, are we constantly introducing ourselves?
I guess so. I mean, every time you take a photo, it's from a different time, so it's like everybody changes and changes with age, and so I guess every time somebody takes a photo of you, or or they meet you, or it's you're kind of you're exposing yourself to a new set of people that you have to explain yourself to or feel comfortable with.
And I think representation is sometimes quite uncomfortable. A lot of people are very comfortable with representation, image, identity. This is what I am. This is the coat I wear. Whereas others, and I would include myself in this, are a wee bit uncomfortable with that relationship and try to be in another way. It's very, very difficult because society is structured around the former way.
I remember as a young person, as far as image went and projecting an image and being comfortable in doing that, that wasn't me as an autistic person. And I see it in textbooks as described as autistic boys and girls hiding and camouflaging. But I didn't see it like that. I still don't see it like that. I saw it as to give myself the best chance of surviving within a group that I was just about to enter. I wanted to give out as few additional possibilities of judgment or negativity or tribalism, so that I wouldn't wear a shirt that had a football team on it, or I wouldn't wear a certain fashion that went with a type of band, or I would be relatively neutral as much as I could, so that I could adapt everything else within that, because I also knew that I was going to be different from the group enough, and I didn't want to invite any more difference. I don't see that as camouflaging. I just see that as giving yourself the best chance to find a group that's going to accept the other things around you that are already different.
Maybe in a lot of senses, I've taken the opposite path to you in terms of I'm not a neutral person. I don't want to be a neutral person, because and maybe that's masking as well. Maybe, you know, doing what I do in the way I do it is so that it's kind of like a so fucking what, I'm just like this sort of deal. But it might not, I don't know. But I've never been a neutral person. When I was a teenager, I was well known for walking around in a silver lame catsuit when I was going out places and sticking out and being okay. So, you know, it's just it was good to be different. I wanted to be the freak show.
Is that for yourself, Lucy, or was that for others, you know, to make an impression?
Totally for myself. And I say that only because I think I was breaking out of some sort of conformity that I had in my home life, and at this point, I was breaking free of parental controls, and breaking free of the rules and regulations I'd followed all my life. So I'm guessing that this was a chance for me to kind of do the complete opposite and see how it went. You know, I'd spent my life being quite closeted and kept aside and not going out and really not doing parties and not really wanting to stay at friends' houses because it used to scare me too much, to just saying, you know, I'm going to go completely full on this way and see where this takes me. So every change has probably been kind of, I'm the one doing it. But my very early incarnations, when I was sort of dressed in bizarre clothing, and so I used to wear these jackets with epaulets and all sorts of things, that was for me. And I just think I liked to think of myself as being that little rebel.
I guess it's like the extrovert introvert thing, you know. People work in different ways. You know, we can rebel in different ways. We have our weirdnesses in different ways. Some of them are very visible and obvious, and others may be in a sense hidden perhaps, or obscured, just a reflection anyway.
Or maybe I was doing it as a kind of maybe having a really out there front-facing image, maybe being, you know, dressed in whatever I was dressed in at the time, was a way of them not going much deeper than that surface and that image. And you know, if somebody wanted to come and speak to me, that was fine, but I almost quite enjoyed the fact that being that way would repel some people. I almost saw it as some sort of filter in my life, where being overt and showy was perhaps the best way of finding the people who were going to stick with me and be like me and, you know, be a good friend to me, because they just got me.
Yeah, there's loads of theories about masks and Greek tragedy and stuff, and even in psychology about how it's a way of gaining access. It can sometimes be a truer representation of identity than what you think of yourself, or what you've been conditioned to be.
neutral. In my 50s, I'm relatively likely to walk around in quite unusual clothing. I make some of my clothing myself, cutting arms off old fur jackets that I find in flea markets, and I have a mink waistcoat made from an old lady's best opera jacket. I wear things inside out, true, yeah, and I have adapted some of the collars on my shirts so that they come up higher, like an old-fashioned wing collar, and I wear shirts you're supposed to wear with cufflinks, with the cufflinks down. You know, I've adapted clothes, so having that now and having fun with that now at this time of life is a very different prospect for me for doing it when you were doing it. It's an interesting difference in two different autistic people, different ways of approaching this when they were younger, I think. It really is.
Sorry, I was going to say you could say we were in the closet, Jules.
Yeah, we're in the closet. Well, was I in the closet? No, I don't think I've ever been in a closet. I mean, even if we look at, I mean, we had an episode on about being queer, and I made my sexuality quite clear there, that it's not cis, it's not straight, straight. But I never felt closeted with any of that. And I never felt closeted as an autistic person either. It's just understanding and self-awareness and having a framework to put your identity within wasn't there. So closeted for me is sort of hiding something, but not understanding something or not realising something is not the same as hiding, you know?
I know this is a real side story again, and this is the thing about having loads of eyes on you. But when I was 6 years old, I won a competition which I'd entered on the then TV show Tis Was, you know, the Saturday morning thing, and I won.
Tis Was, yeah, go on.
Okay. So I was the task was to draw a picture of the studio after the program had finished. As you remember, the program was all about sort of mess and fun and chaos and whatever. So I painted this picture. My brothers and sisters helped me a little, and sent it in. Thought nothing. Then got a telegram. This is how long ago it was. I got a telegram informing my mother that she had to phone immediately to the Tis Was studio and get me booked in for the next Saturday. So at 6 years old, I found myself on a train to Birmingham, about to go on live TV, live in front of an audience of millions, and had to, I was underneath a desk and I was pulled up by the ears with Chris Tarrant on one side and Sally James on the other. And I came up, I had my hair in pigtails, and everybody in the place went, oh, like that. And I remember at the time, and then just thinking, oh my God, everybody in the world can see me at this point. And I still have this on video, so I have proof. I'll show it to you one day. And the look in my eyes, that 6-year-old's eyes, is so very, very terrified that I can, when I think about it now, my stomach flips over. And I think, how could I ever? But I did. And every now and then, I just I look at the video, or I see the photo that I've got of it, and I just think, isn't it amazing what you can do when you're just ambushed into something?
Children's TV does have a lot to answer for, eh? I was sitting there thinking, and all this ends up with, Chris Tarrant, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire?
I'm sure he wouldn't recognise me if we ever met again. But yeah, I do have the sort of kudos of knowing that my, let me see, my right ear had been grabbed by Chris Tarrant at some point. He was awfully hungover that day, and he said that, so that's not even speculation.
God, weren't they all hungover on that show?
Yeah, we're probably leaving the topic here a bit. Maybe we should get back on track.
Shall we have a bit more of the blog?
Sure thing, no problem. Okay, so now my memory, or hard drive, is possibly not what it used to be. But this was a prototype version of me from some point in the past. I couldn't tie it down to a year or even a decade. I don't wear jewellery. I don't own makeup. I don't even have a hairbrush on account of no longer having hair that needs brushing. Whoever this variant was, I could no longer connect to her, and the more I stared at the picture, the more I thought about what Lucy Mark I was doing at that time. I'd left home when I was around 18 and found myself out in the wild, living in shared houses, drifting in and out of situations and relationships. I have moved more times than I care to count. I know the people you should notify you've moved list backwards. The process of picking up and leaving and settling back down has been repeated over and over again. I've changed my outer appearance many times in order to fit in. My memories are not linear, and I often find that I will misremember the timeline. My memories are like a faulty USB stick. I don't have photo albums. There are no pictures on the wall. I've never kept a diary. I have a box under my bed in which contains mementos of my travels, but other than this, I retain nothing of past lives. Strangely, it is the awful item of clothing that jogs my memory slightly. I cannot, however, tell you how old I am here. All I know is that someone, an ex-partner, gifted it to me. I also remember hating it. It was coupled with a pair of matching trousers, also black satin and flared, but begrudgingly feigning delight and wearing it because I didn't want to offend. Like the drawer in the sideboard, recollections are placed in a jumble in the back of my mind. I have no real use for many of them. They have become irrelevant. Diving back into obsolescence and digging through them holds no real importance to me. The photo has been slipped back into the drawer, where it will stay until the next time I bump into me, or perhaps after another reboot.
So when you say you had no memories of past lives, yet this photograph turns up in the mare's nest, because I have a lot of places that could be termed mare's nests, like old scraps of poetry, albums, LPs, records, books from my teens and my 20s that I've retained, because often I see them as part of my identity. I think sometimes you can be a bit sexist here and say that it's a very male thing, but I think it's general sometimes that people will accumulate media that they respond to as an extension of their identity. So I can find parts of my former lives all around me here, and it's not that I hold on to them in any kind of way. I'm very different from how I was, but there are some things that linger.
I think that, now because I'm anchored now. This is where I'm supposed to be. I'm married and I live here, and so I moved away from where I live. So I lived in London. Now I live way out in Salisbury, so I'm a long way away from everything I knew. So it was coming back into a new neutral space for me. When I came to live in the southwest here, it was like I could come into there absolutely as myself again, and and just be me in that space, because nobody there knew me, and and nobody had a clue who I was, and I was just someone from London who just sort of ended up there. So like I say, I've got a big wicker basket under the bed where I've got bits and pieces of stuff that will remind me of it, but it's under the bed, and I don't really go in there and look at it, because I've done more with this Substack, going back over my past, than I would have done if I hadn't started this, because before writing any of this stuff, I just didn't bother. I didn't really reflect, and I didn't really think, and I didn't really want. But this has allowed me a new place to be and a new person to be.
That's the thing about social media, eh? It's like the self-curation that it induces in you, the timeline.
And something like Facebook will throw up old posts. I'm big on Facebook. I like it. It's a lot of my connections, and a lot of people hate it. I like it, but when you go on there, it will give you every few days like a little things that happened on this day, sort of thing, like a little time capsule that they send you, so you can go back over the things that you've posted on Facebook, and that can be really illuminating sometimes. I quite enjoy it, because I can go back 10-15 years and maybe see a photo of me from then, or something that I was doing. So for me, it's like, it's nice to kind of revisit some of these things when I feel like it, but not often.
Yeah, I like the random serendipity of those reminders, yeah, but often it's also got that dark side to it of capitalism, where it's like, you might not need this, but maybe you want to buy this again.
Yeah, I try and ignore all that. Last time I clicked on anything on Facebook, it led me to be scammed, so I'm even more off it now, to be honest.
It's journaling, isn't it? It's blogging and journaling, and so often we're asked to see this as some kind of narcissistic modern enterprise of self-aggrandization, but it isn't that in this context, is it? It's creating a structure that then gives you perspective, because you record how you felt at a certain point and what you thought that went along with those feelings, and then when you look back or you go from a different thing, you can compare the data, and you can see that you felt certain things at and it went with a certain mood, and it went. So you then start to inform the way you live absolutely in the present, and how you approach the future, because you have some kind of record of the past. Because memory doesn't do it. Memory is recreated. It's not the reality that people assume it is, but putting some kind of record down, where there's some kind of fact structure is there to apply yourself to, looking back, I think is a really positive thing for all human beings.
It's like territorial marking with dogs.
I'm just chewing that over in my head and seeing if that's what it is for me. I don't know. I know this is solely a sort of a very me. It's this is just me talking about me, and I sometimes think it's a little bit selfish in a way, and maybe I should be exploring other things and other people, and work. but it is really, I'm the starting point, and then whoever gazes upon what I write, well, that's a bonus, you know. And when I see that people are looking at it, it kind of gives me, it's nice. It's like a little bit of validation, a little bit of, you know, sort of well done if I'm getting loads of views and something and comments. And but blogging is it's not something I've ever done, and now that I am doing it, and writing things down, there are days when I'm writing a piece and it's turning me inside out and I feel terrible, and other times when I'm really full of it and thinking this is great and I'm really enjoying it. It could be a very different experience depending on the mood of the piece.
I see it very simply as a process. It's like I'm trying not to, well, it's not even trying. Very often we think about things rather than just think, and that process also applies to other activities. So when you say journaling or even thinking, it's not about, it can be about things. You have a subject, but then you hit a phase where it's not about anything in particular, and it's just the process, which itself can be quite creative and quite illuminating.
You're describing it as a way of getting in a zone, I'm guessing. Applying yourself to anything is a bit like that, though, in some ways. Applying yourself, people have different ways of doing it, but applying yourself to something gets you into a zone, and it gets you into what some people then talk about as a monotropic state, etc. Or I don't like that one. But I do go with inner zone because it's general enough for everyone to sort of latch on to a free flow state, a way of a creativity space rather than a functional, I will think about this problem or I will think about this object. Yeah.
And it can sort of lead to there being less you involved.
Yeah, that's when you start giving me alarm bells about whether Raymond is trying to get me into a cult or not. The Zen Buddhism sort of thing.
Hey, you're the leader.
I lead nothing. Nobody follows me. Oh dear. Yeah, I just see it as important that people find something like this, whatever they call it, however they describe it. Finding something like this, I don't know, attaches yourself to yourself somehow.
Just let it go.
It's attachment back to you. It's like, you know, sort of coming back to the mothership when you kind of discover a part of yourself that you've kind of forgotten, and you kind of welcome it back on board in a way. I mean, there's a memory I've shared, and I've shared it and put it down and read it again and again and again when you're writing it and changing bits and whatever. But it's really strange how you kind of you can start latching back onto that identity again. I still can't feel exactly how the other me felt, but I can attach to it a little bit more and say, look, okay, I acknowledge your presence. You were there, you did it, you worked through whatever it is you were working through, including having to wear a really disgusting satin black suit for somebody, and sort of own me again and just say that's what I was at the time, and you know, it's all part of me.
I'm going to say again that I think when I first heard that story that you've told today, I really liked it because it had this thing in it of like a random event opening up a revelation that then went off into tangents into other things. It opened up a Pandora's box.
sometimes the things I do are really uncomplicated, and sometimes they have to have a good run in so you could get to it. And what I liked about that was that really random nature of the discovery, and how, you know, life can kind of ambush you from time to time, and you are doing something completely whatever, you know, searching through a drawer, looking through a cupboard, you know, finding something in the bookcase, and it's like a little TARDIS back, and you know that it can start a whole thing where you just wonder where you went from there and how you were from there, and you know, and so it can be a great sort of self-learning experience. And sometimes I can look back on really bad situations and I can go over them and I can explain them back to myself and realize how strong I was to get through something. It's freeing to be able to do that and say, whatever comes up, I'm obviously able to cope. And that's shown by the fact that I'm still here in one piece and happy.
It feels to me, Lucy, that you've come to a rather lovely way of concluding things today, but is there something more from the blog?
No, that's the end of that particular post.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so that's all done for today, and it's been a big one, so I may have to have a lay down.
Yeah, I'm sure you...
How is the flow, Lucy? Are you feeling that's how are the waves, the currents of using the Substack?
Oh, I really like it. Over Christmas, I had a really boom time with it. So I put up the thing about the boots, which I shall probably come upon much later whilst doing these things. But that was a really, really big one for me. I some days I put stuff up and it doesn't get much. I'm getting into looking at the stats now and going, wow, I can't believe that I'm getting this many people jumping on and being part of my journey here. But I think Substack is a great place. If you've got something to share out there, then you do find people who want to kind of join you and be part of it. I like it because you don't have a set schedule. I like it because I can post twice in a week or once a month if I want. So the flow is good. I enjoy it.
I wonder if you do this thing I used to do, which is like the unsent post.
Yeah, I do have loads of unpublished stuff that I haven't. That's just sitting in a little drafts folder on Substack, which I've put down, and I've not. They're just there, and I can read them, but nobody else can. So yeah, I do have a kind of like a little secret stash.
They're great. I love them. The private stuff.
I want to pick up on one of the comments I've seen in the various places that we're broadcasting at the moment. D. Zimmerman says that it also speaks to him after discovering his MS diagnosis recently. So a crossing of disabilities in some ways.
And actually that's really something. Obviously I know where I am and I'm very channeled, but it's if somebody is catching up on what I'm doing and they're in a very, very different situation, but they can still see similarity and maybe something to inspire or work with, then hey, what more can I do? That's a wonderful thing to hear, and it's a great job done. It's like, you know, I feel good about that.
Thanks, Lucy. We're going to join you again tomorrow for... Crikey, is it day 4 already?
Yeah, it is. I believe my husband's meant to be joining us tomorrow as well.
Right, okay, so we've got a different show at 3 o'clock, or are we doing 2 shows?
I'll get back to you on that.
Well, okay, I'll announce it live.
Yeah.
So,
I thought this was the final day.
No, tomorrow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
so we'll join you again, Lucy, tomorrow. Day 4 of 4 from Radio Days 2024, the time where we're out there, Autistic Radio, between Christmas and New Year. Later on, we've got our regular drop-in, the 444 PM. Something that we do every Sunday, but during Radio Days, we have a slightly altered version of it, because the 444 drop-in is the regular people here on Autistic Radio. Normally on a Sunday, anybody can just drop in by and put their voice out there. Today, if you drop in by, your voice won't be recorded for Radio Days either. The way we work it is that you're private until you say you're not private. So anytime you wish to join a drop-in during Radio Days or on the Sundays, either silently or texting us or eventually putting voice if that's what you want to do, be welcome. Returning to the theme we have today, which is autistic knowledge development, I want to play the next time we spoke and follow up with some ideas of where things happened after this.
Our words, we listen.
We speak. Our words, we listen.
We speak. Our words. We listen.
We speak. Our words, we listen.
Welcome to Short Introductions to, an Autistic Radio production for autisticradio.com. It's part of our mission to find and talk to people who have a relationship with autism.
Our words, we listen.
We speak. Our words, we listen.
We speak. Our words. We listen.
We speak. Our words, we listen.
Today we have the Autistic Knowledge Development Podcast. Sean and Lila, both autistic, both autism professionals, both working actively on our behalf. Hi guys, welcome today.
Hi, welcome. It's good to be back.
Hi, thanks for having us.
What are we going to speak about? What's the important thing going through your professional lives?
We've just secured funding for phase 2 of our Embrace Autism project, which is a combination of autistic-led and designed facilitated group support running over 6 weeks, an hour and a half each time with 6 theme sessions. And for this phase, we're also adding a heavily moderated closed Facebook group, which will be a chance to kind of meet and get to know more autistic people. There'll be some Facebook lives with some themes, which again, we're very keen for the autistic community to be the driver and the decider of what those are.
Wow. That sounds like an impressive set of resources for us as autistic people. Is this part of the funding that was organised for the later diagnosed group?
It's money that comes from the Scottish Government, brokered by Inspiring Scotland, called the Autistic Adult Support Fund. There's ourselves and I think 14 other different projects and organisations providing different kinds of support for autistic adults across Scotland. But we're one of only 2, as far as I'm aware, that provide a genuinely national support offer, because everything that we do is online. So it kind of democratises where and how people can access support across Scotland.
That sounds wonderful. I tried to involve myself with it, but I didn't manage to be the helpful person I want to be. I think I picked the wrong organisation when the funding was offered. The people were going to use a meaningful input from the autistic community and from autistic people. It was very well worded, the offer that they put out for that. So I tried to work with the Autism Network over several months trying to put my input into that, but at no point did I manage to do so. So it's wonderful to find an organisation like yourself that did have a meaningful input from autistic people. How did you go about that? Besides being autistic yourself, that's not enough, is it? You can't just go on your own version of autism. How did you involve other autistic people?
Well, it's an important kind of point that you've raised there now, and kind of it's not to kind of diminish any of the autistic-led projects, some of the more grassroots autistic-led projects that are out there, but we felt that it's really important that all support that autistic people receive should have an evidence base, and that there should be a way, in a quantitative way, so in a kind of 1 to 5, 1 to 10 measurable way that you can put in a graph of actually showing what difference a project did or didn't make to an individual's life that's come to receive support. Now, we see that as something that parts of the autistic-led community could be better at. We see it as something that parts of the non-autistic-led community could be better at. It's having the kind of lived experience, the knowledge of what it is to be autistic, but also with a relevant and appropriate professional background. And where we've partnered here, we partnered with the National Autistic Society Scotland. They've arguably got the kind of most well-known autism brand in the UK, certainly if not one of the best well-known brands in the world. The director of National Autistic Society Scotland, a guy called Rob Holland, is quite progressive in his thinking. He's been employing more autistic members of staff. So between our organisation and Rob's organisation, every single front-facing person that's involved with a project will be autistic. So if you're an autistic person, your first email through to your onboarding conversation, through to everyone that will be in the room in groups is all entirely autistic.
Wow. I'm wondering if I can jump ship, because I'm a late diagnosed autistic person. I was diagnosed in 2020, and I've been waiting this 4 years to get my introduction to autism from Autism Initiatives, who run things in my area. And I've just got onto their course, which is funded by the same people that you are funded by. And I'm starting to think, I've got the second class course instead of the first class course. What appeals to me about your course is you're making it available to everybody, but also that follow up, that community that you're building as well. So I think the course I'm going to be going on, they're going to be talking at me and then they're going to dump me. And I think that's the main difference.
Well, I always try and lead on positives anyway, and focus on what we do rather than what anyone else doesn't do. One of the main differences, for example, is one of the weeks we talk heavily about masking and the impact that can have on even being able to get a diagnosis, right through to all aspects of your life. Masking that you might do consciously, masking that might be involuntary. And we also have quite an unusual take for an autistic-led organisation. We believe if you're capable of masking, not all masking is necessarily a bad thing, because in the world that we live in, it's my belief that it's not safe to unmask and be your true, authentic, autistic self in quite a lot of spaces. We take a quite balanced and nuanced approach, and how we designed the project was to actually try and be the middle ground, to try and be a safe space for people with all sorts of different views, with people that might refer to what their own experience of it is to be autistic in their own language, that might even want to use language that might be seen by some of the community as quite out of date. But it's the individual's choice what you do with your own autism and how you describe your own autism. And a big part of what we're trying to do is just to normalize the experience of being autistic, not to whitewash that it's a completely kind of pleasant walk in the park experience, because it can be very difficult. I've had lots of challenges within my life, but where we do try to take the conversation is to say, look, if you've had a formal diagnosis, or even if you've self-diagnosed through many of the online tools available, all of that's generally going to be telling you what someone else thinks wrong with you. And we'd actually like to try and encourage people to, in a safe group environment, start to explore about what's right with you and actually start to explore all aspects of autism, not just the negative sides.
Wow. I can imagine myself being an autism professional listening to you and thinking that's the kind of attitude I need in my profession. I can imagine them thinking a lot of the time they have difficulty with autistic groups because they come from a kind of oppositional standpoint. There's a politics, there's that kind of angry advocacy is what I call it. Whereas you are very clearly accessible to the autism professional. That's a lovely balanced thing I'm hearing from you. I want more of that in my life.
Thank you, Jules. That's a very kind thing to say. And it's one thing that I'm very conscious of myself, in that I prefer not to talk about kind of the traditional view of being an autistic person with higher support needs or lower support needs, because I think that does both groups of autistic people a disservice. And also, if I look at my own life, I've got a lot in common with both groups of people. And actually, there certainly would have been points, perhaps in bits of my childhood, that I might have been described as someone that potentially has higher support needs. And I think that the more we can start to view ourselves as a community, and I'll kind of give you something to hang your hat on here. In the first phase of Embrace Autism, we had a real cross-section of general society, never mind the autistic community experience, age ranges, backgrounds, what people did as professions, what people didn't do as professions. One of the things that was unanimous on all of externally evaluated feedback was how much people got from being in a room just full of other autistic people. And that's not a unique idea or anything, but actually there was something really validating, really empowering about just being in a room with other autistic people. And there was quite a lot of people actually realised that this was the next stage to them understanding their own autism, was actually to be around other autistic people. And even on a more flippant level, thinking that thing that you think's far too weird to say in public, realising at least half of the room did exactly the same thing and had their own versions of it. It's this kind of taking away from your own internalised dialogue and allowing some of that to happen in a safe space with other autistic people that we've found has been really beneficial to helping people to feel both positive about being autistic and more positive about themselves as well.
I don't know if anybody else wants to pick up on that point. I'll give my thought on it at the moment. And that's that in another scenario, say a group of women are behaving naturally together, and as soon as one man walks into the room, things change. Just that dynamic of the other person, the other group, the other set. And I think that happens to us with autistic people as well. If we are a group together and we are being our versions of masked and unmasked selves, when a neurotypical person walks into the room, it makes it very different. Do other people experience that?
Well, certainly not in groups where they're autism interested, like the parents' charity in Fife I used to be a question answerer at. I think it would be more if it was a postural macho type of neurotypical who wasn't at all on the wavelength for what we might be exchanging.
So are you saying that it's possible for the autism ally, the informed parent, the informed carer, the informed professional to not have that effect? It's just really a kind of neurotypical that makes us all clam up.
Yeah. I think it's the neurotypical social gear, and you can have a caring or engaged person intentionally engaging with us who is substantially in our gear of content, at least.
Boris, I can understand your viewpoint there, but I'd like just to kind of maybe offer a slightly different viewpoint, and that's about safe spaces. So one of the things that we do in any of our group work is we're very anti if someone drops out, adding someone else, even another autistic person into an entirely autistic space. Because certainly if you're having some sort of group support work, you're essentially talking to a bunch of strangers about things that you might not have even verbalized or shared through text to anyone in your life before. And one of the things that we feel is really important is having skilled autistic facilitators in a space that allows autistic spaces to remain safe. Because I've been in spaces that are supposed to be autistic spaces, and I've felt very alienated, I've felt very unsafe, and I've felt very unwanted and unable to share my viewpoints. And equally, I've been in mixed spaces, both autistic and neurotypical, and felt more comfortable. But I think when it comes to having support for specifically being autistic, I'm a champion of that being an autistic only space. And the reason why I would champion that is it's, again, allowing us to find a voice and to find confidence. And there are so many spaces that are mixed spaces in life, but there are very few spaces that are just for autistic people. What I've found in myself is that I unmask more and more when I'm in an autistic only space, and it actually always provides me with reflection and food for thought about how much more I maybe want to or maybe should unmask in non-autistic spaces.
So your life pros and cons and what you've experienced has been the same wavelength specifically within autistic people. I mean, it's obvious that the person running the thing, or no, autistic running of it, and the empathy of going through the same thing, that's obvious. But I've often known the problem of social anxiety with autistic people, often unable to get themselves to go to a thing, face going to, even if they reasoningly want to. One of these co-occurring issues, because social anxiety is its own condition, and our entities can have it, but we know there's a link to our social challenges cause it in us. But anyway, I've often seen that folks with it benefit from having a family member with them. So if the family member's not autistic and they're just silently not doing anything, their presence can be helping the autistic person to be there. But if their presence is breaking the bubble for another autistic person, then that's the conflict between their two needs.
Can I offer another way of potentially viewing that? So quite often we have, when we're running groups online, people who might not have the confidence for many reasons to have their camera on for the entire session. Sometimes it might even be the last 15 minutes after 6 weeks, someone gets the confidence to put their camera on. And not everyone uses spoken words to talk. Some people use text chat. All of these are completely fine. But one of the things that I found that's really helpful, and we do this quite a lot when we're working with autistic young people and autistic young adults, but it's true of autistic people of all ages, that there's something about everyone being ripped out of their comfort zone, but with other autistic people together, that actually is quite empowering, and that actually helps everyone collectively get outside of their comfort zone. And I've facilitated groups before where there might have been half of the group that's decided to have cameras off and might just be observing, which is completely fine. And then you'll see someone kind of sort of break the bubble. And then it's almost like watching a domino effect of the kind of courage that they've been able to find, actually inspiring other people to kind of maybe take the camera off, maybe to start chatting in the text, maybe to start chatting using spoken words. And I think that's one of the empowering things about being in a group of autistic people, is we've got the authenticity to actually, in a kind and helpful way, gently push each other to helpful places just outside of our comfort zones.
It's interesting to me that you mentioned this camera on or camera off, because I've been thinking about this myself. When I'm going to go to this meeting, I realised that I would be more comfortable if I did not show myself on camera. And it's not about fear or social anxiety. It's about thin slice prejudicing. It feels that as soon as people get a few seconds of my image, then they can run themselves in any directions about what kind of person I am. Almost like people know that they're going to buy a house when they first see it for a few seconds, even though it's the biggest transaction of their lives. An instant decision. And I feel that if I go on camera to this next meeting where I'm going to have my autism explained to me, I will immediately somehow get people's back up or make them make assumptions about myself. I'm expecting the person leading this group to want to see people and to request people to put their cameras on, and I'll be very happy if they don't do that.
In our groups, it's incredibly important to allow people to engage with the group in a way that works best for them. So we always, on the offset, encourage people to communicate verbally or by text, have their camera on or off, because for us it's more important that the individual is comfortable, and we can explain why someone may want their camera on or off. I mean, for your reasons, Jules, that's an incredibly valid reason. Another reason, which would be one that I would often have for myself in meetings, it's to do with sensory input. On a Zoom meeting or anything, I can find it very difficult seeing my own image whilst watching images of other people's faces, taking all of that information in whilst trying to digest the core content. So however you process information, it's more important that you engage with the group the way that is most comfortable for you. And I would expect a good facilitator would allow you to do that in a way that you think it works best for you, and explain that to the group so everyone is comfortable on the offset.
To follow on from what Lila said there, and again, we've mentioned this on a previous podcast with you, which is kind of if you're a autistic person but working as an autistic professional, that your needs, your reasonable accommodations are way, way secondary to those of the people that you're supporting, you're trying to help in a group. And whilst as a presenter, yeah, it might be a lot kind of more easy from your own ego sense of actually seeing reactions of people when you're chatting, or it might be that you're presenting a little bit of information, but that's about what's good for you. That's not necessarily about what's good or right or the best thing for the people in the group. That we're very clear, myself and Lila and anyone else that kind of delivers work for us, is that it's about what's best for the room that you're supporting. We've updated in our paperwork that goes out to participants before they join, is we've explained why some people might have the cameras off. We've explained why some people might not contribute either through text, chat or spoken words for the first few weeks, maybe even at all. And the fact that that's perfectly normal. That's a lot easier to do when it's an autistic only space. Whereas if I was a participant and I had someone in the room that wasn't autistic but that was just observing, it would make me clam up a little bit, if I'm honest.
I think it's interesting what Sean says, though, because when we use the audio model, we're all camera off, audio only. We can use text and voice. Whereas if it's a mixed group, maybe I'll be the only person that doesn't feel that they want to make their visual image the thing that people judge them on. And that might mean that, as Sean says, that some people will feel that that is making them uncomfortable. It's almost as though the mixed idea of, oh yeah, you can put your camera on and you can put your camera off, causes another difficulty for people, because this hidden face that is uncomfortable for people.
It's interesting saying that, though, but again, coming back to the autistic only space idea, Jules, and both mine and Lila's very recent experience of this is, if it's an autistic only space and you take the time to explain why some people are doing this, we've found everyone was incredibly supportive, and even people who'd raised it as a potential issue in feedback at the end of the project when it was explained why it was done, they instantly felt really bad about being judgmental and could completely understand why someone would be that way, and actually wanted to really backpedal on what they'd said and done before. If you know that everyone's autistic and everyone's come into the same space with the same reasons, everyone might be experiencing different levels of anxiety, but everyone is experiencing some form of anxiety, it just acts as a really helpful leveler, and also helps to differentiate between kind of you overthinking about what someone else is doing and actually focusing on what your own experience is of being part of the group.
So the question I asked was about how, when you're devising the product, when you're devising the scheme, the support mechanism, how did you consult with autistic people to frame it? Or do you feel because you're autistic, you managed to start with something that would work for us?
Lila and I are two autistic people. I am an autistic man and Lila is an autistic woman. We're about to talk later this afternoon in a relatively public forum. And again, we're very conscious that we are two autistic voices and we cannot speak for every autistic person. But what we can do is make sure that any hypothesis, any assumption, any good idea we think we have is heavily tested and developed with the autistic community. We have a 5-question framework tool that helps autistic people that we've supported see if the support's been any good, see if they've actually changed about how they feel about things. One of the core questions in that is, how do you feel about being autistic? And that's one that we see across the board, a positive uplift after we've supported a person. That framework was tested and rejigged and wording changed and made more accessible through live testing, gaining feedback with autistic people for a period of about 2 years. The project that we're doing now with National Autistic Society Scotland is based on our learnings with other autistic projects and also getting live feedback from the autistic community as well. Themes and subjects that regularly come up in other groups that we've ran, themes and subjects that regularly come up in one-to-one support, a sort of master list of best guesses, even the slight curveball questions that sometimes get brought up when you're providing support. We think that we've kind of tested and shortlisted what the kind of most pertinent things, the kind of back of the book version, if it was a novel, that you would want to know instantly there. But it's a really valid question that you bring up. Yes, the fact we're autistic and professionals is helpful, but that's a jumping off point, and it's no excuse to be lazy or cut corners in actually making sure that everything is tested and evidenced by our community.
Yeah, it's really important for us to work directly, to design, to collaborate with as many autistic people as possible, because that gives a representation of many different people's experiences, responses, life offerings. The external evaluation that we did for the first phase of the project, it was fundamental for us to have an autistic professional leading that. And Sinead Ashanti from Ashanti Research did the research for us. By speaking to the participants and getting the feedback of all 70 people in the first stage of our project, I view that as well as 70 additional autistic voices commenting, and we learnt from the feedback. We took on board people's opinions and experiences and have been able to develop the project to benefit the next stage of participants, which we hope to be 120 over the next year. So this collaboration and listening to evaluation and feedback is key to everything. When you are designing a project, Sean and I have our own experiences, but it would be a disservice if we only listen to our own voices. We have to collaborate with others.
Wow. What I feel as though I'm hearing here is a couple of professionals in autism who are pushing themselves incredibly hard to be the best at what they've been asked to do. Almost like a woman would say if she was on the board of a large company that she has to be absolutely the best at it to continue to be there. That the standards expected, the need to go above and beyond what is asked is put upon you as autistic people, as autism professionals. Whereas it might be in other quarters, people don't feel quite that amount of pressure. Am I reading something here?
You've hit the nail on the head.
I think there is a want to leave a legacy. So Sean and I have developed projects and ideas, sometimes based on what we think we would have wanted when we first found out that we were autistic. It was mentioned earlier that you can sometimes find out you're autistic and then you maybe go on a course and then you're just left on your own. And I think particularly for later diagnosed adults, it's quite a common story. You get told this information and then you go back out into the world and there's nothing else there. We would love to leave a legacy of some form where that's not the case for other people who are going to have that experience in the future. And by changing the offerings that are out there, because potentially it could be argued that Sean and I wouldn't have engaged with some of the offerings at the time because they weren't good enough. It would be an idealistic world to think that there was a lot more support out there in the future, and we're just trying to do our bit to make sure that that support is there and it's informed by autistic people for autistic people to create much more positive outcomes for people. So yeah, we probably do want to do the best.
Well, yeah.
And just to follow on from that, what Lila and I are doing and our other autistic colleagues, it's not about ego. We are very conscious of the fact we have had to struggle to find where the doors are. We've had to negotiate them open. Sometimes we've had to force them open. And whether we like it or not, in my opinion, there are quite a lot of parts of the sector that would like to see this fail, because by us existing and doing the job that we're doing, it jeopardizes a lot of the status quo that's gone on before. So the reason why we're trying to be the best of the best isn't for us, isn't for our egos. It's so that the autistic people that come after us are given a chance, and actually that people, if you kind of bring an autistic employee or you bring in a project that's entirely run by autistic people, people will have changed what their baseline assumption is of the likelihood of this project succeeding, of the likelihood of this project being good. We do feel a weight, we do feel a pressure sometimes. We know that we have to succeed in what we're doing, especially in some of the larger, more high-profile opportunities that we're given, genuinely trying to make sure anything that we do is the best that it possibly can be. And that's not only for autistic people that come afterwards, but they're also so that many of the disenfranchised autistic people who might have had poor or unsuitable supports can see what it's like to have a support that's genuinely designed for them.
You've both raised my spirits. You have both made me feel more hopeful, and I thank you for that. The idea that there could be a legacy of a couple of autism professionals who are autistic creating a model that could be copied, used, rolled out, that's fantastic. I remember using the word legacy when I spoke to an autism professional, Richard Ibbotson, the Autism Network. I offered him a legacy. I was trying to say, if he got it right, if he did take a meaningful input from a wide group of autistic people, he would be able to leave his career on a high. And I think that's still available for other autism professionals out there. We would offer some of what you have, Sean, to any autism professional who wanted to get a meaningful input from autistic people, especially the people in my age group. However, looking at the way you're doing it, I think we would have to learn a lot from you first. Are there enough autism professionals out there who want to leave a legacy at the end of their careers to show the change that's happened over the decades? What do you think?
Well, it's a conversation Lila and I had separately around the kind of balancing act between challenging what needs to be challenged, but doing it in a way that brings people with you and makes people feel welcome to come with you on the kind of journey and to be part of creating and facilitating the change. One of the difficult balancing acts is there's a status quo that needs to be changed, but making sure the people that have been part of the status quo for so long feel both welcome and able to be part of the change, if that makes sense.
To me, that sounds like a fitting closing statement there. You're offering a safe space for the autism professionals to learn from you, to cooperate with you, to join with you, and to fulfill the ideas of change that they have wanted throughout their careers and get them implemented. Thank you for doing that, Sean. Thank you for doing that, Lila.
Thank you for having us again, Jules and Morris and Harry. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys. It's always a pleasure coming on, chatting to you all.
Autistic Radio is personal and it's informal, which means that those taking part speak only for themselves. If they mention an organisation that they work for or they're a member of, they're not speaking on behalf of that organisation. We shouldn't take any implication from that. It's also the case that people's opinions change over time. So while this recording is there forever, people change.
Wow, just listening to that again. If you were able to listen to the first part of the podcast that we've played from Autistic Knowledge Development today on day 3 of Radio Days, you will have heard a huge difference. In the first programme, the passion and the idealism was as yet just bubbling towards realisation. And there, in episode 1, we come to a place where everything has been put into place. The plan was created and executed, delivered and measured and adapted. And that has all happened within a period of less than a year, in my experience of them. The rapid development that they have made happen and the continuing development as they go along, to adapt as they go along, is also part of the model of creating other developments within the autism profession. It's not just about what they did, it's about how they did it. I don't think that people who are in the autism professions who are not autistic should limit themselves to what they have been doing. I am fortunate to speak to many different people in the professions around autism here at Autistic Radio. And there's a deep thread of wanting to do the right thing that comes across every time I speak to the professions. And there's another thread of the frustration with what's around them in their own career, immediately around them, that makes them unable to do what they see as the right thing. But my belief is that there are so many non-autistic autism professionals that could look at the model these guys have created, and by employing some autistic people, and they could put it into place, they could be the framework, they could multiply this. We don't have to see this as a conflict. And then the method of creating their plan, that's something that you can adapt in every part of service provision. We have to understand as we go forward that there is a reluctance in our society to keep putting money into services aimed at autistic people of all age groups. We have to see that. It's the elephant in the room. Only the people in the professions that adapt to this new paradigm will get the funding in the future. And it's not about politics. It's about the efficiency. It's about the measurable outcome for the amount of money spent. We are at a paradigm shift. My expectation and belief is that people blocking this movement forward in small ways at the moment, that they don't understand and don't realise that they're doing, and also people who see this as a threat, you're going to be bypassed. It's time to embrace this version now. Because in that way you will achieve what you want to achieve, which is pride in what you're doing, a progressive change in attitude, and if you are coming to the end of your career, being at the tail end of the change that happened. And you can aggrandise yourself from it. What we want as an autistic population is things to get better, and we're willing to make them cheaper by showing you how to do it.